The light filtered through the lace curtains in soft golden beams, painting delicate patterns on the wooden floorboards. Outside, the tall oaks and maples swayed gently, their leaves cascading in waves of amber, copper, and crimson. Each gust of wind sent flurries of leaves dancing through the air, a choreography of farewells written by nature itself. Henry Mathers opened his eyes slowly, blinking against the mellow morning light. At 78, his body no longer obeyed him the way it once had. His joints ached with the familiar dullness of age, and his breath came slower now, deeper, more reflective. Yet, on this morning, it wasn't the stiffness or the chill in the air that woke him. It was a weight in his chest, an ache that wasn't quite physical, a silence too complete. He turned his head slightly toward the old mattress laid near the hearth, the one that had become Charlie's bed over the last year. There, nestled in the folds of a plaid blanket faded from countless washings, lay his golden retriever, the companion of nearly 15 years. The fire from the night before had long since died down, leaving only the faintest scent of smoke lingering in the room. Henry pushed himself up slowly, careful not to startle Charlie. But there was no need for caution this time. The dog, who had always been the first to stir, the first to greet the morning with tail wags and soft whines, remained still. "Charlie, boy," Henry murmured, kneeling with effort beside him. Charlie's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his name, slow and heavy, as if the simple act of waking required immense strength. When he saw Henry, a faint flicker of life sparked. His tail gave a weak thump against the floor, a sound so soft it might have gone unnoticed in any other moment. But to Henry it rang like a bell, a last echo of loyalty. The old man's hand trembled as he reached out, running fingers through the dog's fur. Still soft, still warm, but lacking the eager energy that had once animated it. Charlie's breathing was uneven, shallow, with long pauses between each rise of his chest. Henry didn't need a veterinarian to tell him what he already knew. After 15 years, you learn the rhythms of another soul. You begin to hear the unspoken things. Charlie had always been more than a dog. He was family, a confidant, the silent witness to grief and joy alike, the keeper of memories. A lump rose in Henry's throat, but he forced himself to swallow it. There would be time for tears, not yet. Not while Charlie was still here, still breathing, still holding on. He gently slid his arms beneath Charlie's fragile frame, coaxing him to his feet. The dog's limbs quivered, and his back legs gave out for a moment before he caught himself, drawing strength from somewhere deep within. Henry steadied him, hands firm and patient. "How about one last walk, partner?" he asked, his voice tight, but full of tenderness. Charlie lifted his head, meeting Henry's gaze with those deep, knowing brown eyes. In them, Henry saw no fear, only recognition, love, and maybe understanding, as if Charlie too had sensed it, that this day would be different, that this would be their final morning together in the world they had shared. Henry slipped the old leather leash around Charlie's neck, more out of tradition than necessity. They hadn't needed it in years. Charlie never wandered far, always staying within a few steps of his master's side. The leash, like so many other things now, was more for Henry's comfort than the dog's. He opened the back door slowly, and the scent of autumn rushed in, a blend of dry leaves, wood smoke, and something deeper, older, that lived in the soil itself. Charlie stepped out first, one hesitant paw at a time, like a soldier marching toward a final battlefield. Henry followed, the screen door creaking softly behind them. The yard stretched before them, blanketed in a thick layer of fallen leaves. Every tree, every stone, every inch of this land held stories, memories etched into the very grain of the earth. And for the first time, Henry noticed just how quiet it was. No birds sang, no cars hummed in the distance. It was as though the world itself was holding its breath. They walked slowly, past the garden gate, through the narrow path that led to the woods. Charlie stopped now and then, sniffing the air or brushing his nose against a familiar tree trunk, not marking territory, not out of curiosity, but more like someone touching the walls of a childhood home for the last time. A goodbye. As they moved farther down the path, Henry felt time folding in on itself. He was no longer an old man walking a dying dog. He was a younger man again, laughing as Charlie chased squirrels through the underbrush, calling to Martha to come see how fast he could run. He saw Martha's smile, heard her laughter echoing in the breeze, felt her presence in the sun-dappled patches of warmth that filtered through the canopy. It was as if the past had come to walk with them. Charlie paused near the old tree swing, where the grandkids used to play. His tail moved once, a slow wag. Henry stood beside him, resting a hand on his back. "We've had some good times here, haven't we, boy?" he said softly. Charlie didn't answer, of course, but he didn't need to. The garden had once been the pride of the Mathers home. Even now, though the rows were tangled with autumn weeds and the soil had long since surrendered to time, the bones of Martha's careful design remained. Ghosts of tomato stakes jutted from the ground like forgotten sentinels, and the faint aroma of basil and mint still clung to the breeze, as if the plants refused to be forgotten. Charlie paused at the rusted gate, his nose twitching in the air. Henry smiled faintly, stepping beside him. "You remember her garden, don't you, boy?" He leaned against the fence post, his eyes scanning the once orderly rows. He could still see her, Martha in her straw hat, dirt smudged across her cheek, talking to the vegetables as if they were old friends. And there, always nearby, lay Charlie, a puppy then, all ears and tail, basking in the shade and watching her work with the reverence only dogs seem to possess. "She used to talk to those plants like they could talk back," Henry murmured, his voice barely above the rustling of the leaves. "And you'd just sit there and listen. God, how she loved you!" Charlie's ears twitched, a subtle sign of recognition at the sound of her name. Even now, in his frailty, the memory of her voice could stir something in him. Henry felt a stab in his chest, not the sharp kind of fresh grief, but the deeper ache that comes with time, the kind that softens the edges, but never really leaves. He reached down and touched Charlie's back gently. The dog was warm beneath his hand, but Henry could feel the bones more clearly than ever before. Time had carved its signature into both of them, creased skin, thinned coats, stiff joints, yet the essence, the soul of who they were, remained untouched. They stood together in silence, wrapped in the perfume of wilted rosemary and memories that clung like morning fog. When they moved on, the pace was even slower. Charlie's paws disturbed the dry leaves with a whisper-soft crunch, each step an echo. They passed the bird bath that Martha had insisted on placing near the lilac bush. It hadn't held water in years, but a single yellow leaf floated in its cracked basin now, like a forgotten offering. "You remember the time she caught you trying to chase the hummingbirds?" Henry asked, his lips curling in amusement. "You were just a pup, all legs and mischief. She was so mad, but not really. Couldn't stay mad at you for more than a minute." Charlie gave a soft huff, perhaps in protest or perhaps in memory. Henry took it as both. They reached the edge of the yard, where manicured grass gave way to the wilder forest beyond. Henry paused there, resting one hand on the old split-rail fence. The trees rose tall and proud ahead, forming a cathedral of wood and light. Shafts of sunshine streamed through the branches like divine fingers, illuminating the path they had walked for years. "This was always your favorite part, wasn't it?" Henry said. "The forest." Charlie looked ahead. Though his steps had slowed, there was still a flicker in his gaze, a flicker of wonder. This was more than just a walk. It was a journey through time, a pilgrimage. The moment felt suspended. The wind calmed. Even the birds held their songs. It was just Henry and Charlie, two souls, one old and one older, returning to the place where life had felt most alive. As they stepped into the woods, the air shifted, cooler, earthier. The scent of moss and pine mingled with the dry sweetness of fallen leaves. It was the smell of seasons ending. Charlie stumbled slightly, and Henry reached down to steady him. He felt the old dog lean into him, just for a moment, drawing comfort, trusting him, as he always had. "I've got you," Henry whispered. "Always have." And they walked on, deeper into the trees, each step carrying them away from the present and closer to the heart of everything they had ever shared. The forest greeted them like an old friend, quiet, vast, and filled with a hush that felt almost reverent. Towering pines stood as sentinels, their trunks scarred by time and weather, their limbs draped in filtered light. The branches overhead formed a green cathedral, and through the canopy, golden beams of sunlight fell like stained glass upon the forest floor. The air was different here, cooler, fragrant with damp earth, cedar, and a hint of approaching winter. Every footfall on the soft carpet of pine needles and moss was a gentle whisper, as if the world itself were afraid to speak too loudly. Charlie moved slowly now, but with determination. Each step seemed to cost him more, yet he pressed forward, nose twitching, ears attuned to every sound, as if taking inventory of every scent and sound one final time. Henry walked beside him, letting the leash hang loosely between them, not as restraint, but as a thread of connection, a lifeline. They passed the hollow log where years ago Charlie had once cornered a family of raccoons. Henry could still recall the commotion, the barking, the scampering, the way Charlie had emerged proudly, tail wagging and tongue out, clearly expecting praise for his valiant, if chaotic, effort. They'd laughed all the way home, and even Martha, who usually scolded the dog for getting too dirty, had chuckled when she saw the leaves and twigs tangled in his golden fur. Charlie paused at the log now, giving it a slow, deliberate sniff. Then, with what looked like a soft sigh, he moved on. The forest was filled with echoes, not sounds necessarily, but memories. The rustle of leaves overhead reminded Henry of spring mornings spent walking beneath fresh green growth. The soft gurgle of the nearby creek brought back summer afternoons when Charlie would splash in the water, chasing minnows with boundless energy. The crisp crunch of acorns underfoot carried the scent of October and brought to mind quiet walks where they shared the trail with foxes and deer. Henry stopped at a bend in the trail and looked out toward the creek. Its water shimmered in the light, dancing over smooth stones, carving their own ancient song into the landscape. Charlie had loved this spot. Many times they had sat by the water, Henry with a book in hand, Charlie curled beside him, content simply to be. "I read you that whole Steinbeck novel here, didn't I?" Henry said, turning toward the dog. "You never interrupted once. Better listener than most people I know." Charlie tilted his head slightly, a tired but familiar motion. They continued on, each step more poignant than the last. Charlie's body was tiring fast now. His back legs dragged a little. He no longer stopped to sniff every fern or mark every tree, but his eyes, those warm, soulful eyes, still burned with awareness, still watched Henry, still glowed with love. Henry felt tears pressing against the edges of his resolve, but he kept them at bay. He had promised himself he would be strong. For Charlie, they passed the old culvert where, years ago, Charlie had gotten himself stuck chasing a rabbit. Henry laughed quietly at the memory, how he and Martha had taken turns coaxing the pup out with bits of leftover roast chicken and soft, loving scolds. Charlie had emerged triumphant, covered in mud, wearing an expression of pure pride. He'd never caught the rabbit, but you'd have thought he'd won a medal. "You were always the brave one," Henry said now, "and stubborn." The trail opened slightly, revealing a clearing dappled in light. At its center stood a small boulder, weathered smooth by time and rain. Around it, wild flowers still bloomed defiantly against the chill. Blue asters, goldenrod, and the last pale blooms of wood sorrel. A monarch butterfly floated lazily through the clearing, unaware, or perhaps very aware, of the significance of the moment. Charlie stopped at the edge of the clearing. He lowered his head slightly, breathing heavier, his chest rising with effort. Henry knelt beside him again, placing a steadying hand on his shoulder. "You okay, boy?" he asked. Charlie looked up at him, eyes soft, filled with something ancient and serene. He took one small step forward, then another, and they entered the sacred space together. The clearing opened into a gentle slope, and at the bottom, nestled among tufts of wild grass and low shrubs, shimmered the pond. Its surface, glass-like and still, mirrored the sky above, a vast canvas of soft blues and streaks of white cloud, framed by the fiery tones of autumn. A single leaf fell, slow and spiraling, landing upon the water with a faint ripple that grew, widened, and faded. Time reflected. At the edge of the pond stood an old bench, weathered silver-gray by years of rain and sun. Henry had built it long ago, back when his knees were stronger and his heart still beat beside Martha's. They'd spent so many evenings there, holding hands, watching the ducks paddle in lazy circles, talking about nothing and everything. And then later, after Martha's voice had quieted and her hand was no longer beside his, it had become his and Charlie's spot. They had continued the tradition, man and dog sitting side by side in silence, both drawing comfort from the rhythm of the natural world. Henry approached the bench slowly, helping Charlie lie down beside it. The dog let out a deep, weary sigh as his body sank into the grass, his chest heaving with effort. Henry sat heavily, the wood creaking beneath his weight, and with great care he lifted Charlie's head onto his lap. His fingers found the soft fur behind the dog's ears, and as he stroked gently, Charlie's breathing began to slow, not with pain, but with surrender. The quiet was profound, not empty, but full, of meaning, of presence, of memory. "You know, Charlie," Henry began, his voice a whisper stolen by the breeze, "I've been thinking about how much you've changed my life." Charlie's eyes remained on him, not wide or bright like they used to be, but calm, steady, present. "When Martha first brought you home from that shelter, I didn't want a dog. I told her it would be too much, too loud, too messy, too much work for an old man like me." He chuckled softly. "Shows what I knew." A bird called from somewhere deep in the trees. The breeze stirred again, carrying the faintest scent of lake water and pine needles. "You were just this little golden fuzz ball back then, didn't even fit in my two hands, and you were so clumsy, always bumping into furniture, chasing your tail until you got dizzy and fell over." Charlie made a quiet noise in his throat, not quite a whine, more like a murmur. Henry smiled. "But then you grew, not just in size, in spirit. You became something I never expected. You didn't just fill the house. You filled the space Martha left behind. You gave me purpose. You gave me mornings again, gave me warmth at night. You sat with me through winters and grief and birthdays that felt hollow." The pond shimmered in the sunlight. A dragonfly darted above the water's surface, catching the light like a fragment of glass. "Martha used to say you had an old soul," Henry continued. "Said you understood things most people never do. How to just be. how to listen without interrupting, how to forgive without needing an apology. A silence fell between them, but it wasn't empty. It was rich, full of all the things they'd never needed to say aloud. Henry reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small handkerchief, soft cotton, worn thin at the corners. He dabbed at his eyes, then took a deep breath. "You never asked for anything. Not really. Just to be near me. Just to be part of the day." He looked out over the pond, the water now turning a shade of gold under the noon sun. For a moment, Henry imagined he saw reflections of every moment they had shared there. A young Charlie splashing at the edge, Martha laughing with her sandals in the water, himself reading aloud with his feet in the grass. He glanced down. Charlie's eyes were still open, still on him, still listening. "You showed me what love looks like when it doesn't ask for anything in return. What loyalty means when it isn't conditional. You made my life bigger than it would have been without you." A tear slipped down Henry's cheek, but he didn't brush it away. "You were never just a dog," he whispered. "You were my home." Charlie let out a low exhale, and Henry felt his breath against his hand. It was shallow, but peaceful. The sunlight warmed them both. In the distance, a heron lifted off from the far side of the pond, its wings wide, slow, graceful, as if moving through another realm altogether. And still they sat, Henry stroking Charlie's fur, Charlie watching the only man he had ever truly loved. No words now, just the sacred quiet of two lives shared, two hearts resting, and the soft, endless murmur of the lake of time. They remained in the clearing for a long time. The sun had begun its slow descent, casting long shadows across the pond. The breeze had cooled, brushing gently through Henry's hair and causing the water's surface to shiver with delicate ripples. But neither man nor dog moved. The silence between them was full, deep, like the space between heartbeats. Eventually, Henry knew it was time to go home. He shifted slightly, careful not to jostle Charlie too much. The dog's breathing was thinner now, like air moving through silk. He made no protest. When Henry slipped his arms beneath him, Charlie's body, once strong and full of energy, now felt impossibly light, as though his spirit had already begun to lift, even while his body still remained. Henry rose slowly, cradling Charlie against his chest, like he had when he was a puppy, like Martha had done that very first night they brought him home. The dog's head rested on Henry's shoulder, his breath warm against his neck. The trail back felt both infinite and fleeting. Each step was etched into Henry's memory, even as it passed. The trees that had once towered seemed to bow their heads as he passed beneath them. The forest had grown solemn, as if it too understood that something sacred was occurring within its bounds. Henry's mind wandered as he walked. He remembered Charlie's first snow, the way the dog had bounded through the drifts, nose first, tail whipping the air in ecstatic disbelief. He thought of the nights when thunder had shaken the windows, and Charlie had crept up onto the bed, his body trembling, until Henry's hand calmed him. He thought of birthdays, of lazy Sundays, of Martha's laughter echoing through the house, while Charlie chased soap bubbles across the kitchen floor, and now all those memories felt like threads, golden and silver, stitching their way into the fabric of this final walk. When they reached the edge of the yard, Henry paused. He was tired, but not weary. There was a strength that came from love, and he drew upon it now. The house stood quiet, its windows glowing softly in the late afternoon light. Smoke no longer rose from the chimney, but the scent of last night's fire still clung to the air. The garden was still, the bird bath untouched. Henry crossed the threshold and entered, carrying Charlie with both hands, as if he were something infinitely fragile and infinitely precious. Which, of course, he was. Inside, the warmth embraced them. Henry laid Charlie gently on the thick quilt near the hearth, Martha's favorite quilt, the one she had sewn in their first year of marriage, a patchwork of faded blues, forest greens, and soft yellows. It had wrapped countless moments, afternoon naps, winter evenings, grieving shoulders. Now it would cradle one more. He sat beside Charlie, brushing the golden fur away from the dog's eyes, and reached for the phone. His fingers trembled slightly as he dialed a familiar number. It rang once, twice. Then came the voice, low, calm, kind. "Dr. Morrison," Henry said, voice low. "It's time." There was a pause on the other end. No questions, only understanding. "I'll be right over," the vet said gently. "We'll make it peaceful for him." Henry hung up and let the silence settle again. The fire had long since gone out, but the warmth of the day still lingered in the walls like a gentle hand resting on the shoulder. He turned to Charlie, who had not moved, but whose eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice. "We're home now," Henry whispered, "right where we're supposed to be." He sat with him, hand resting on his side, feeling the rise and fall of the old dog's chest. Slower now, more spaced between breaths. The rhythm of goodbye. Outside, the light began to fade into amber. Shadows lengthened along the floor, climbing the furniture in slow, reverent procession. Dust motes drifted through the slant of the sunlight like little pieces of time, suspended. Henry kept speaking, not of death, but of life. He told Charlie about the weather forecast, the first frost expected in 2 days. He mentioned the book he was reading, the leaves he'd rake tomorrow. He spoke of ordinary things, the kinds of things they had shared together every single day. Because that's what their life had been built on, not grand adventures or dramas, but the sacred quiet of routine, of presence. And Charlie listened, eyes closed, breath shallow, but still listening. Twilight had begun to gather when Henry heard the sound of tires on gravel. He rose slowly from the floor, his knees stiff from sitting, but his heart steady. Through the lace curtain in the front window, he saw the familiar shape of Dr. Morrison's pickup truck, easing to a stop under the old maple tree. No hurry, no sound beyond the crunch of cooling leaves beneath the wheels. The door opened, and out stepped the man Henry had known for nearly 2 decades. Dr. Morrison had aged over the years, just like them all, but his movement still carried a quiet precision, a gentle confidence that came from years of working with animals and the people who loved them. In his hand, he carried his black medical bag, not large, not imposing, just enough to do what needed to be done. Henry opened the front door before the knock could come. "Evening, Henry," the vet said softly. "Evening, Doc," Henry replied. His voice didn't shake. Not yet. Dr. Morrison entered quietly, removing his shoes out of habit, and followed Henry toward the hearth. The smell of wood smoke lingered faintly in the air, mingling with something sweeter, the scent of dried lavender from a nearby sachet. The room felt suspended in time, still, dim, sacred. Charlie lay where Henry had left him, nestled in Martha's old quilt, eyes closed now, chest rising in slow, shallow intervals. He didn't stir as the doctor approached, but his ears twitched faintly at the sound of Henry's footsteps behind him. Dr. Morrison knelt beside the old dog, setting the bag down gently. "Hello, old friend," he murmured, resting a practiced, compassionate hand on Charlie's side. His touch was light, reverent, not that of a doctor examining a patient, but of a man greeting someone he'd known a long time. "You've had quite a run, haven't you?" Henry knelt opposite, folding himself beside his dog with the same care he might give to a fragile piece of glass. Dr. Morrison ran his hands gently over Charlie, checking his heartbeat, his breathing, the muscles in his legs. though both men already knew what he would find. "His heart is very weak," the vet said softly, "but he's not in pain. He's just very tired." Henry nodded, eyes on Charlie, his hand stroking the dog's fur in slow, steady rhythm. "I didn't want him to suffer," Henry said. "I couldn't let that happen." "And you haven't," Dr. Morrison replied. "He's calm, peaceful, he's ready." A long silence followed, the kind that doesn't ask to be filled. Then quietly, Dr. Morrison asked, "Would you like a few more minutes with him?" Henry looked down at the dog who had given him 15 years of love, of loyalty, of life. Charlie's breathing was faint now, as soft as the breeze outside the window. His eyelids fluttered. His tail gave a tiny flick just once. Henry bent down, pressing his forehead to Charlie's. "Thank you," he whispered, "for everything, for every morning, for every walk, for every day you stayed when you didn't have to. You were the best part of my life." His voice trembled, but didn't break. Not yet. Charlie stirred slightly, as if trying to lift his head, but he didn't have the strength. Still, his eyes opened for a brief moment, and in them Henry saw everything. The puppy who had leapt into his lap, the dog who had walked beside him through grief, the friend who had stayed long after the silence took hold of the house. "Okay," Henry said softly to both of them. "We're ready." Dr. Morrison nodded and reached into his bag, withdrawing a small syringe. His hands moved with practiced precision, quiet and unhurried. Henry cradled Charlie's head in his lap once more, one hand stroking between his ears, the other resting over his heart. He began to hum a tune, soft, barely a whisper, an old lullaby Martha used to sing to the grandkids. Charlie had heard it 100 times, maybe more. The injection was quick, gentle. Charlie's breathing, already faint, began to slow further. Henry felt each one, each rise, each fall, until they didn't come any more. One final breath, one final pause. Then stillness. Henry sat in that silence for a long time. He didn't speak. He didn't cry. He simply sat, holding his dog, his hand still resting on that now motionless chest. Outside, the sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a wash of gold and lavender in its wake. Dr. Morrison placed a hand on Henry's shoulder and gave it a gentle squeeze. "I'll leave you with him," he said softly. "Call me when you're ready. No rush." Henry nodded, not trusting his voice. The door closed quietly behind the vet, and in the deepening quiet of twilight, Henry whispered, "Good night, my boy. Run free now." Then he leaned down and pressed a kiss to Charlie's forehead, and at last the tears came. The next morning, the house was too quiet. No soft padding of paws on hardwood floors, no stretch and yawn beside the fireplace, no warm waiting gaze near the front door. Just silence. Thick, still, heavy. Henry awoke before sunrise, not because he was rested, but because his body had grown used to early mornings with Charlie. Even after the long emotional night, something in him stirred before the dawn, an echo of habit, a ghost of routine. He sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the spot near the hearth where the quilt still lay folded, the fabric slightly indented where Charlie's body had rested. The fire was cold now. The room, too. He didn't light the fire. Instead, he rose slowly, dressed without much thought, and moved through the house, as if wading through water. The absence was not just noise. It was weight, a tangible pressure that pressed against his ribs, that creaked the floorboards differently. Every room carried a memory. In the kitchen, he stood with one hand on the counter, looking at the spot where Charlie would sit during breakfast, waiting patiently for a crust of toast or a scrap of bacon. In the hallway, he found himself stepping over the spot where Charlie used to nap, a habit formed long ago to avoid tripping over him. He paused, realizing there was no longer a need for that careful detour. It hurt more than he expected. He made coffee, though it tasted like nothing. He sat in his usual chair, cup in hand, staring at the empty spot by the fireplace, the spot where Charlie would usually curl up with a sigh, resting his head on his paws, ears twitching with every shift of sound in the room. But there was no twitch now, no sigh, just stillness. He remained that way for a long time, not crying, not speaking, just breathing, letting the silence settle around him like a blanket woven from years of companionship. Later that morning, when the sun had risen and poured its warm light across the floor, Henry went outside. The yard looked the same. Leaves still fell. The trees still swayed. Birds still sang in cautious, hesitant tones, but everything felt different. He walked slowly toward the old oak tree at the back of the property. In one hand, he carried a small shovel. In the other, the quilt. Charlie was wrapped inside it, swaddled in love, in memory, in the fabric Martha had stitched with her own hands. It felt right. It felt complete. The spot had been chosen long ago, beneath the oak tree where they had once picnicked, where the grandkids had played, where Henry and Charlie had spent countless hours watching the wind ripple through the grass. The earth was soft from recent rain, and Henry dug with care. He worked slowly, reverently, not rushed, the kind of digging that isn't about labor, but about ritual, a final act of service. He placed Charlie into the ground with shaking hands, but a steady heart, covered him in soil gently, as if afraid to wake him, and when it was done, he sat beside the fresh mound for a long time. "I'm not going to say goodbye," he said aloud, "because you're still here." He laid a flat stone at the head of the grave and pressed his palm against it. "I'll talk to you every morning," he whispered, "just like always." And he did. In the days that followed, grief moved in waves, sharp in the mornings, dull in the afternoons, aching in the evenings. But it also came hand in hand with something else, gratitude, because Henry began to realize that sorrow at its core was just love with nowhere to go. And when he let that love breathe, when he wrote about it in his journal, when he spoke to Charlie beneath the oak tree, when he remembered the joyful chaos of a life shared, the pain softened. He began to smile again. Small smiles at first, then larger ones, especially when the memories came suddenly. The harmonica howls, the stolen slippers, the cautious dips into the bath. Little moments that once seemed ordinary, now transformed into treasures. Neighbors stopped by. They'd heard. The mailman, Mr. Curtis, left a card with a simple message. He was always kind. The Henderson kids next door brought drawings, stick-figure dogs with big smiles and hearts on their collars. One simply said, "Charlie was a good boy." And he was. The best. Henry wrote everything down, every memory he could recall, every small story. He didn't want to lose any of it, not a single detail. He wrote until his hand cramped, and then wrote some more, not just to remember, but to honor. Because even in the silence, Charlie's love remained, not in body, but in the house, in the trees, in the way the morning sun lit the floorboards just so, in the echo of his own laughter when he remembered something silly and small and utterly irreplaceable. Charlie was gone, but love never leaves. The seasons changed. Winter came in quietly, blanketing the world in white. The pond froze over. The trees stood still in their bare silhouettes, their branches stark against a pale sky. Inside the house, Henry found a quieter kind of rhythm. Slower mornings, warmer fires, longer pages in his journal. But Charlie's presence never faded. Every corner still whispered of him. A tuft of golden fur that escaped the broom. A worn toy still tucked behind the couch. The leash, now coiled gently on a hook by the door. Untouched, but never forgotten. At first, Henry kept to himself. Grief had made him contemplative, protective of his solitude. But over time something stirred. A memory, a promise, a voice he could almost hear, not Martha's, not Charlie's, but perhaps both. "We need life here, Henry." That's what Martha had said all those years ago, when the children had grown and the silence had stretched too far between their words. She'd brought Charlie home because love needs somewhere to live, somewhere to move, to breathe, to wag its tail. One cold morning in January, Henry drove down to the local animal shelter. The receptionist recognized him, not by name, but by heart. "You're Charlie's human," she said with a warm smile. "He was kind of famous around here." Henry felt the ache rise again, but this time it didn't swallow him. It warmed him. "I'm not looking to adopt," he said gently, "but I'd like to help." And so he did. Every week, Henry returned. At first, he walked the older dogs, the quiet ones, the anxious ones. He spoke to them the way he'd spoken to Charlie, softly, patiently, with the kind of love that doesn't expect anything in return. Soon, the staff started calling him the dog whisperer. He read to the puppies. He brought treats. He taught the children who visited how to approach a shy dog, how to see with their hearts. He shared stories, laughed, even cried now and then, but not alone. One day, a young boy named Miles came in with his parents. He'd recently lost his own dog and hadn't spoken much since. Henry knelt beside him, holding a nervous mutt named Daisy on a leash, and said, "You know, I had a dog who used to bring me my slippers. Never trained him to do it. He just knew." Miles looked up. What was his name? Charlie. They sat there for an hour, talking, not just about dogs, but about love, about what it means to lose someone who saw you better than anyone else. And in that moment, Henry understood something deeper. Charlie's legacy wasn't in what was gone. It was in what remained, in every tail wag, every gentle lick, every child who learned to trust again, every old dog who found a new home. Charlie had given Henry 15 years of pure, unfiltered devotion. And now that love was rippling outward, touching lives he would never meet. Henry never adopted another dog, not because he couldn't, but because Charlie was never meant to be replaced. Some souls aren't chapters, they're entire books, and their stories are meant to be shared, not rewritten. So Henry kept walking, kept returning to the shelter, kept showing up, and every morning he'd stop beneath the oak tree, coffee in hand, and say, "Well, partner, what do you think we should do today?" And sometimes, just sometimes, when the wind was just right and the light slanted through the trees in that familiar way, he could almost hear it, the soft jingle of tags, the quiet bark from somewhere beyond, a reminder that true love never leaves. It just changes form. If this story touched your heart the way Charlie touched Henry's, leave a comment below. Share your memories, your stories, your dogs who changed everything. What was the most unforgettable moment you shared with your four-legged friend? Let's celebrate these bonds together because they deserve to be remembered. If you felt something today, hit that like button to help spread this story of love and loyalty to others who may need it. And don't forget to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a story that reminds us what really matters: connection, kindness, and the quiet, beautiful presence of those who love us without question. Until the next story, remember, true love never dies.